Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Thursday, September 5th, 2019. On today's episode of the show, we're going to be talking about the latest film and TV news. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm the senior writer at SlashFilm.com, and I'm joined on today's episode by Slash Film managing editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
And writer White Train Bowie.
Hey everyone.
All right, guys, so let's jump right into the news today. HT, yesterday afternoon, we learned some interesting news about the future of Ben Wheatley, a director who's done a bunch of stuff that we've liked, but this is sort of a surprising new project for him. What is he going to be directing next?
Ben Wheatley has been tapped to direct the next Tomb Raider sequel, starring Alicia Vikander as the titular treasure hunter and video game character. MGM confirmed that it was had set the sequel for Alicia Vikander's Tomb Raider for a release date of March 19th, 2021, and that Ben Wheatley, who you may know from directing films like High Rise and the excellent Free Fire, will be directing this film.
Jacob, I have to throw this to you because I know that I didn't even see the Alicia Vikander Tomb Raider, but I know that you did, and you kind of enjoyed it, right?
Yeah, I think Tomb Raider movie's pretty good. It's not great, but it's pretty good. It's better than most video game movies. But for me, the real news here is Ben Wheatley, because Ben Wheatley owns, I think, Kill List, one of his second movie, is in my top 15 of all time. And I love Free Fire. I love High Rise. Sightseers, his dark comedy from about 10 years ago, maybe, is outstanding. He is a pitch black, very funny, very brutal director, and I did not see him making a Tomb Raider movie, but he's making it with Amy Jump, who's written a lot of his movies, and this is such a bizarre pairing, and I'm glad to see Wheatley, making something big, as opposed to being stuck, in not stuck, but working exclusively in small movies. But I do not know what Ben Wheatley's Tomb Raider looks like, and that's kind of exciting.
So
yeah,
go
I
ahead.
I also saw the first 2018 Tomb Raider, and I actually quite liked it. It's not, a great movie per se, but it's probably in the higher tier of video game adaptations, which is not saying much, but it's, a solid film, and I would say that it's one of the best video game adaptations just because it made me really want to play the video game. So, I'm really interested to see where Ben Wheatley takes this because, like Jacob said, he's very, blackly comic kind of director. I've only seen Free Fire, but I love that movie. And I hope that if, this movie, if the sequel turns out good, then he can use it as a launching pad for a Hollywood career because he's kind of been working on the down low, mostly in the UK and everything and in indie films. So it'd be interesting to see if this helps launch his career in some way.
Yeah, I know that he's directing a remake of Rebecca coming up, so HT, you should be interested in that, I know.
I love that book, and I absolutely love the Hitchcock version too, so yes, I'm very excited about that.
Jacob, I think last we heard he was developing a remake of The Wages of Fear and a monster hunting movie called Freak Shift. There was some talk, I think, early last year that he may be in contention for a Marvel movie. With all of those things, potentially, that he could be juggling or in contention for a Tomb Raider. I just can't get over this. A Tomb Raider sequel, no less. What do you? Is this something that you're? Would you rather see him do something like this just for the curiosity factor, or would you? Are you sort of? Is a part of you sad that maybe some of his more personal projects might be delayed because of this?
My pet theory here, and this is me pulling this out of thin air, is that since Amy Jump is also writing the script, that this is a big Hollywood offer that let him have the most breathing room. You make a Marvel movie and you're working in a Marvel house style, you're working for Kevin Feige, you're making a product that has to fit in an assembly line of what those movies are. And the assembly line makes things we enjoy, but assembly line nonetheless. Whereas Tomb Raider was enough of a hit to get a sequel, but it wasn't huge. People aren't in love with that first movie. So I wonder if they are taking a shot with Ben Wheatley saying, hey, come do something crazy with this and get people interested. So that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping he took this because it's the one that let him be himself the most.
I'm going to throw out a light spoiler warning for the first Tomb Raider and ask you guys a question. Did Walton Goggins survive the end of the first Tomb Raider?
Very dead.
Oh, damn.
I know.
I was really hoping that Walton Goggins could unite with Ben Wheatley because I feel like that would be an interesting pairing.
That would be great.
Maybe he could come back as a ghost or something. But crazier things have happened in Tomb Raider mythology, that's for sure. So let's move on to the Crazy Rich Asians sequel. An interesting story came out yesterday about writer or co-writer Adele Lim, who was the first movie's only Asian writer. She co-wrote the first film with Peter Chiarelli. Apparently, she has left the sequel. She was supposed to be coming back to co-write the sequel. I think this movie is supposed to have two sequels that are going to be shooting back to back sometime in 2020. And this story broke yesterday that Lim essentially walked away from the sequel after realizing there was a huge pay disparity between what Warner Brothers offered to her and what they offered to Peter Chiarelli, her co-writer. They apparently offered him $800,000 to $1 million in the early initial offers, but only $110,000 for Adele Lim. And Chiarelli has written movies before. He has a story by credit on Now You See Me Too. He most famously wrote The Proposal, which was a successful rom-com with that starred Ryan Reynolds and Sandra Bullock back in, I think, 2009 is when that came out. And Lim came from the world of TV. She wrote for shows like Private Practice and Lethal Weapon and Life on Mars. Crazy Rich Asians was her first screenplay credit. But man, yeah, this is like a pretty huge disparity, and apparently Warner Brothers basically said to her representatives that these quotes are like industry standards. These are the ranges that you should expect based on experience and stuff like that. They said, quote, making an exception would set a troubling precedent in the business. So for me, the really interesting part is, so this happened, they made this offer, she realized the disparity and decided to leave the project. All of that happened last fall, and they spent 5 months looking for another writer of Asian descent to sort of take Lim's place in this. And the studio ended up coming back to her in February of this year and offering her something that was closer to Chiarelli's offer, but she still turned it down. And I feel like that is says a lot about her character, because it probably would have been very, very easy for her to just accept that second offer. But it's clear that this is an important topic for her, that she's willing to pass on presumably a pretty big payday, and instead sort of speak out in the hopes of trying to like level the playing field just a little bit. So I wanted to sort of toss this out to you guys. What do you make of this? HT, I know you're a big fan of Crazy Rich Asians. What was your reaction to this?
I do think it's significant that Adele Lim is the only Asian writer on this film, and yet she still was offered such a minor fraction of Chiarelli's pay. And the fact that that was the case even after the first film was such a success speaks, widely about the structure, the industry standards that the studio was talking about. I think that Adele Lim probably was in the right in this case, and the studio shouldn't have approached it in this way, especially for a film that is so monumentally important to the Asian American demographic.
Yeah, for sure. And we should note too that apparently Peter Chiarelli had offered to split his fee with Lim, but she I'll just read her quote here. She said, "Pete has been nothing but incredibly gracious, but what I make shouldn't be dependent on the generosity of the white guy writer. If I couldn't get pay equity after Crazy Rich Asians, I can't imagine what it would be like for anyone else, given that the standard for how much you're worth is having established quotes from previous movies, which women of color would never have been hired for. There's no realistic way to achieve true equity that way." So yeah. It really seems like she's like taking a stand on this and trying to like bang the drum and let people know what's going on here, and hopefully those sorts of industry standard practices might change a little bit, because it's kind of nuts thinking about how successful that first film was.
Yeah, it's nuts too, because Crazy Rich Asians was hailed as such a watershed moment for Asian American representation in a major Hollywood film, and yet behind the scenes they're still not really doing justice by their lone Asian writer on the staff.
Yeah. And she also said, quote, "Being evaluated that way can't help but make you feel that is how they view my contributions." And that's the end of her quote. But she also said something about how she thinks that women and people of color are often regarded as, quote, soy sauce, people who are hired to sprinkle culturally specific details on a screenplay rather than credited with the substantive work of crafting the story. And I thought that was a really astute observation. Like, how many times have we heard about studios hiring X person to come onto this project, and it's like, oh, they're really good at doing this one tiny thing, and it's like them sort of sprinkling their touches across it. But if there's like a huge pay disparity there, it's not like she was just brought on for touch-ups. She was like co-writing this whole thing. So just a sort of a bummer overall. But I'm glad to hear that she's taking a stand, and hopefully by us talking about it and everybody else talking about it, it will sort of raise awareness, I guess, for lack of a better term, and maybe move the needle just a little bit. But in the meantime, Adele Lim is writing the script for Raya and the Last Dragon, which is a Walt Disney animation movie that we talked about when we were covering D23. So you can read more about that in the article at slashfilm.com. Jacob, do you have any thoughts on this?
My thought is that this sucks, and it's shameful, and there's no excuse for it.
Yeah. I mean, there you go. Why didn't I go to you first, Jacob? All you had to say was that, and then we could have just moved on. Okay, so let's talk about The Handmaid's Tale. Margaret Atwood, the author of the original book, announced last year that she was writing a sequel to the acclaimed novel, and it's called The Testaments, and it is also set in the oppressive religious community of Gilead, where a lot of The Handmaid's Tale takes place. We learned yesterday that MGM and Hulu are teaming up to adapt this new book, which is supposed to be coming out sometime this month. I think it's September 10th is the official release date for that new book. MGM and Hulu are teaming up to adapt that book for Hulu, but it's still unclear at this point whether this new story is going to be worked into the existing show or if it's going to be a separate show altogether, because The Testaments takes place 15 years after the original novel ended, and that is basically 15 years after season 1 of the show ended, because the first season of The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu stuck very, very close to a direct adaptation of the book, even ending on like the same image of Offred / June getting in the back of a van and her fate being ambiguous. Obviously, we know what happens after that because Bruce Miller, the showrunner, and his team have continued the show on. The 3rd season just ended. We talked about that not too long ago on the show. It's been renewed for a 4th season. Miller has talked at one point about wanting to do up to 10 seasons of the show, which I find personally kind of nuts. But yeah, this new book, it takes place 15 years after the events of the first book, and it actually is it features 3 different narrators: a young woman who is raised in Gilead, a Canadian teenager who learns that she was actually born there, and Aunt Lydia, who is one of the sort of villains of the first book and is played by Anne Dowd in The Handmaid's Tale. So HT, I wanted to throw this out to you. Are you interested in this at all? Like, I know you read the book, right? The first Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale book?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So are you interested in A, reading this book, and then B, like seeing maybe some of these story elements either rolled into The Handmaid's Tale as it currently exists as a show, or potentially as a separate show?
I am interested in reading the book. I think that Margaret Atwood, after seeing her novel being adapted to the series, kind of regained an interest in Gilead, and now with the show and the story's themes being so relevant and timely today, it just was like perfect timing for her to write a sequel. I don't know how I would feel about it being rolled into the show as it currently is, because I have my issues with the series. I do think that it spins its wheels way too much, and I'd rather be interested in seeing just a one-off adaptation of this book, because I do think that The Handmaid's Tale works more as a parable versus a long-running story, I guess you would say. So I'm not really sure. I could see it being folded into the series as it is. It kind of feels like it's ripe for that, but it just, would feel like it would take a backseat to June's story, as all the other subplots in the series do. But I would be interested to see how Anne Dowd acts out or gets to play out the Aunt Lydia story, because she's just so fantastic in that. So it would be really great to see her, chew on some of that subject matter.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on the Aunt Lydia thing. I don't know. I kind of feel like it could be the shot in the arm that the show needs. Like if they... And they probably aren't going to do this because apparently the writers haven't had a chance to read the book yet, because it's been so protected, under lock and key, that even the writers of the Hulu show haven't had a chance to really dig into that yet. So they're not going to probably incorporate much of the stuff in season 4. But just from the outside looking in, I kind of would love to see a massive time jump, multiple years in the future, and maybe like not even pick up with Offred's story at all, because it seems like there's been so much wheel spinning with her that they don't really know what they want to do with that character anymore. And it would remind me almost of like Orange is the New Black, where it's sort of like you think it's Piper Chapman's story at the very beginning, but it ends up being, this broader tapestry of all these other more interesting supporting characters, instead of just, this one woman who is supposed to be is ostensibly the protagonist. But yeah, I don't know. I could see it going either way as well. So we'll have to keep people apprised of what happens there. Jacob, have you caught up with The Handmaid's Tale yet? I know that you were watching it at your own pace.
Yeah, I watched all season 2, and I could not bring myself to watch season 3. Even my wife, who is a dedicated fan of the show, like, she was editing this season in her head. It said there's about 8 episodes of story in a 13-episode season, and when the show is this miserable and oppressive, stretching it out is just a painful, awful thing. I don't mind misery if it's well paced, and Handmaid's Tale has not done that. So if this new book can provide them reason to actually have longer seasons, or convince them to have shorter seasons with more stuff going on, maybe it's a good thing. I don't know. For now, I am tapping out of the show.
Yeah, and it should be noted too that Margaret Atwood herself apparently has realized, or at least taken note of the show's pacing problems, because she told Time magazine, she said, quote, "They can't keep Offred in Gilead for many more seasons, or a certain amount of wheel spinning will be going on. They have to move her along, and I've given them lots of ways of how that would happen." So that was her quote, and I mean...
So I feel like maybe her book is being like, okay, this is what you can do instead, offering them, an out in a way.
Yeah. So we'll have to see. We'll have to track that and see what happens there. But let's talk about another book series. Let's talk about Earthsea. And this is a property that I have heard about, but really know nothing about. But HC, I know that you've read these novels, and a TV series is in the works. So tell me the story here. What's going on?
Yes. Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea series is a collection of fantasy novels set in this archipelago of islands where magic sort of lays in delicate balance. I consider it some of the most essential pieces of high fantasy storytelling, right up there with Lord of the Rings. But it's often really forgotten in a lot of classrooms and bookstores, which I find a real travesty. And it hasn't really been done justice on the screen either. There was a sci-fi channel series a couple of years ago, as well as a Studio Ghibli animated film. But now it is being developed into a new TV series by A24, with Nightcrawler producer Jennifer Fox producing the series. Jennifer Fox originally optioned the rights to the Earthsea series last year and actually received the blessing from Le Guin before her death in 2018. She received the blessing actually to make it into a feature film, but the project has since been redeveloped into a TV series. And it doesn't yet have a network, but A24 is the studio that is developing and financing the series. And Le Guin's son also gave his support to this project as well. I'm really excited about this, actually, because, like I said, I'm a fan of the series. I've only actually read The Wizard of Earthsea and Tombs of Atwood, but they made such a huge impression on me at a young age. And I really enjoy Le Guin's writing. I think it's just so fantastic and so lyrical. And she has such a rich world building, like a skill for rich world building, that I can't wait to see how this appears on screen. A24 doesn't have a lot of experience, I think, doing like big budget fantasy stuff, but they really have nailed down just like storytelling and genre quality. Storytelling in general. So I'm excited to see where they go with this.
Jacob, have you read these novels by any chance?
I have not. This timing is perfect because this is total coincidence. Over the weekend, at my birthday party, my sister and her husband gave me a hardcover collection of the complete Earthsea. So
wow. Oh, I'm actually really envious, because every time I go to a bookstore and I'm like, hey, do you guys have any Ursula K. Le Guin? They're like, who's that? I get really upset. So this is something that I hope will bring more attention to the series, and hopefully maybe I'll borrow that collection from you, Jacob.
Well, right now it's all the novels and short stories in one hardcover, illustrated, and it's normally $60 on sale for like $27 on Amazon right now. So maybe we should go buy a copy right now before everyone on the show who's listening does it.
I'll give you a second before I publish this episode, HC, to give you a brief jump on everybody else.
Yeah.
Give me like I don't know, like a one paragraph hook of like what this thing is actually about and why you like it so much.
So each of the novels in this series actually follows a different story and different protagonists. But all the protagonists in the series kind of overlap and intersect and show up in various novels. But the story itself deals more with this kind of idea of magic as a pacifying force and not as a force of power. And it's something that Ursula K. Le Guin keeps going back to, and kind of likes to explore the idea of like human nature and nature itself being in balance through magic. It's really beautifully made, like crafted story. I can't really summarize everything for you, but one thing that I think you will find interesting is that Le Guin made a concerted effort to populate her Earthsea series with people of color and characters of color, because she had said in the past that she doesn't like the assumption that fantasy is always predominantly white. So her character in Tombs of Atuan, for example, is a young woman who is darker skinned, a person of color, and that race actually plays like a big role in the conflicts and the tensions between all of the characters in it. It's a real sprawling series. I can't like give you one single hook, but I will say that it's something more, I think, even though it employs a lot of the typical fantasy tropes, actually Wizard of Earthsea is how in high school I learned about the hero's journey. Like that's actually how I was taught to me in like 9th grade class.
Oh wow.
So it has, it's actually like, I feel like it was a formative basis for a lot of those tropes, because the first books were published in like the 1960s, and it kind of formed our ideas of how fantasy and high fantasy are today. But it still is like so progressive in like all of the diverse characters, and its ideas of magic being something that's like a peacekeeping balance. So it's a great series, and I highly recommend it. There's like so many influences that it's cast on other properties as well. I think if you guys remember Aragon, that completely ripped off Wizard of Earthsea with its idea of naming as a tool of power. So it's something that you'll recognize a lot of elements in if you ever read the Earthsea series, but it feels very new just because of how like ahead of its time and progressive it was.
Cool. All right, so that's Earthsea coming from A24. We don't know anything about like when we can expect to see this yet, but it is in development, so that sounds pretty exciting. Okay, let's move on to our last story, and that is that Amazon has cast Midsummer actor Will Poulter in its Lord of the Rings show. And the show itself is something that is still largely shrouded in mystery. We don't know who Poulter is going to be playing in this thing. We know that Australian actress Markella Kavanagh, who I've never really heard of before, was in talks for this, but those two are the only cast members that have been mentioned at this point. We know that the show is supposed to be taking place in the Second Age, which is an era that's well before the events of The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. And recently we heard that Amazon only has the rights to depict events that occurred in the Second Age, meaning that like unless they secure additional rights, they won't really be able to show any of the events that we're familiar with from Lord of the Rings. But Will Poulter, I mean, he's a great young actor. You might recognize him from his role, like I mentioned, in Midsummer earlier this year. He was in last year's Black Mirror Bandersnatch. He was in We're the Millers and The Revenant. He's only 26 years old, but he's shown a lot of range and diversity in the type of roles that he's chosen. I had a chance to interview him for Midsummer earlier this year. I found him to be like a really, really smart, well-spoken dude. So I'm excited about this. What do you guys think?
Well, nice tie-in, too, is that he kind of made his breakout in the Narnia series, the Chronicles of Narnia, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, as
Eustace Scrubb.
Edmund?
That's right. Yeah.
Edmund. Oh, not Eustace. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah,
Eustace
he was like
Scrubb.
the cousin. Yeah, that's right. Wow.
Yeah, the annoying cousin. He was great in the role, and he was actually supposed to, Eustace Scrubb takes like a bigger role in later books that they did not end up adapting. So he gets his chance to be in another fantasy series.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that. Jacob, what do you think about Will Poulter, and are you interested in this Lord of the Rings series?
Oh, of course I am. I like Will Poulter. He's a very good actor, and I'm looking forward to him speaking in his English accent, because I think I've only ever heard him speak in an American accent in roles. Uh, However, here's my question for you guys. Will Poulter has a very hobbity face. He has all the round features you expect from a hobbit, but hobbits didn't really matter to the timeline of Middle Earth at this point. So is he going to be the rare non-angular elf, or will he be a human? Discuss.
AC, what do you think?
Oh, it's hard to say. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they managed to find a way to fold the hobbits into the story, just because we know the hobbits so well. We love the hobbits, and they would just be like a nice familiar, you know, addition to the story, even though they don't really play a part. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he were playing a hobbit, but I could see him as a human too. I have no idea at this point, but it'd be fun to see like which creature he would play.
Yeah, my wife just finished reading The Silmarillion, and she was sort of telling me a little bit about it as she was reading, and she said that the Second Age, which is the events that are supposed to be depicted, or the time period anyway, in this new show, officially ends when Isildur slices the One Ring off of Sauron's hand, and we actually saw that in a flashback in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I just like knowing that that exists in this time period, and is technically something that's like on the table for them to be able to depict if they want to. I'm wondering if Will Poulter is going to be like Isildur himself, or like maybe, you know, somebody sort of surrounding those events, or if this is going to be something that takes place, you know, well before the
hot
ending.
Sauron.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he could be. I think Will Poulter was actually up to play Pennywise in Cary Fukunaga's version of It. So like he has that really malleable face, and I feel like he could get a real good sense of darkness going there if he wanted to. I don't know what Sauron would even really look like, because I think that character never really got like a human form in any way, or at least we never saw his face, right, in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So yeah.
Yeah, we presume him to be somewhat charismatic because he's able to rally together so many different types of species and creatures to his side, and is able to convince people of his goodness, I think, for quite a bit before, you know, he turns. So it would be interesting. That would be a really meaty role for Will Poulter if he were up for that
Yeah,
part.
and this is apparently one of the leads in the series. So again, we don't know who he's playing, but that could be. And Variety also pointed out in their report about him snagging this role that this was a huge win for Poulter, because this part was apparently one of the biggest gigs in town, like one of the most coveted jobs in town for people in his age range. So it certainly sounds like it could be a meaty role for him. So
All right, Ben, I figured it out. Will Poulter will be playing Sauron, but through motion capture, he's going to stand very still and be a tower with an eye above it.
I would love that. Oh man, what a waste. So J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay are overseeing the series, and J.A. Bayona, who directed Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom, is going to be directing multiple episodes in the first season. So we're not sure exactly when that's supposed to be coming out. I think it might be 2020. It could be 2021, depending on how long it takes them to shoot and get this thing together. But it's supposed to be a massively expensive show on Amazon's part, and is definitely going to be one of their calling cards moving forward, I think. So we'll keep you posted on more casting news as it slowly trickles in. Before we go, Jacob, I wanted to give you just a quick chance to plug some of the features that you have on the site. I know that tomorrow on the podcast we're going to talk about a lot of the stuff in more detail, but what have you been up to recently?
Well, this week I was allowed to post 2 set visits that I've been working on. One of which was the Creepshow set visit, which I talked about yesterday, and one of which is the Doctor Sleep set visit, the upcoming Shining sequel from Mike Flanagan. We wrote a number of articles. All of them are up on the site as you hear this. And tomorrow on the show, I will describe to you in great detail what it's like to be on one of the coolest film sets I have ever seen.
All right, what a tease. So I think that's going to do it for today's episode of Slash Film Daily. Let's tell people where they can find more of our work online. HC, let's start with you.
You can find me writing every day at slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at htranbui.
Jacob?
I'm on Slash Film every single day, and on Twitter, I'm Jacob S. Hall.
You can find me writing at slashfilm.com as well. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Ben Pears, and you can find more about all of the stories that we mentioned on today's show at slashfilm.com and linked inside the show notes. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps, and send your feedback, questions, questions, comments, and concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. I'm sure we'll do a mailbag episode sometime soon. And don't forget also to rate and review the podcast on iTunes. That helps us out a ton. Tell your friends about the show. Spread the word any way you can. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you tomorrow.